Welcome. Today we're going to be chatting with Sarah Ramsey about how to negotiate problem solving. Sarah's a professional problem solver and a relationship expert, so can't wait to hear what she has to share with us. And she helps people create strategies for next level success in business and in life through solution-based thinking. She's the host of globally acclaimed podcast, Toxic Person Proof, which I can't wait to dig into, and also the best-selling author of Toxic Person Proof, Clear the Confusion and Learn to Trust Yourself. So Sarah, why don't you kickstart us off by telling us how you came to do this line of work?
I love it. Thank you, Cindy. And, it's kind of funny. People are saying like, oh, are you doing something different? Like professional problem solving? You've been the toxic relationship person. And I'm like, well, tell me, what are your most frustrating problems about?
Yeah.
And they say, oh, my mother, my toxic boss, the employee, that type of thing, or the employee who's always whining, the controlling person who won't negotiate, and so you can see why the work transitioned as it is. And toxic problems are very complicated problems. And if you can solve those, you can solve anything. And so as I was working with my ladies, they started getting promotions and getting raises in these leadership positions. And I said, may I ask what's happening? And they say, oh, we're taking your solution-based thinking into our workplace and we're standing out as leaders and we're cutting into clarity very quickly and clearing confusion. And it's a great way to live. So it made
Yes.
them stand out.
Well, and I so love that intersection because I think it's one of the things that prompted me to create the art of feminine negotiation because when we think about that problem solving, when we think about negotiation, everybody envisions people in a boardroom with business suits on, right? With the big power suit. And really, our most important negotiations are probably those personal ones. As you properly said, it's those interpersonal relationships that are a form of negotiation and problem solving every day. And when you get that nailed down, then you're able to have the ripple effect of bringing that to your work. I love that. Now, I have heard that people make over 35,000 decisions a day or something like that. And yet, decision making and problem solving really isn't a skill that we're taught in school, much like negotiation. So I'd love to hear, how do you bring clarity to the process of effective decision making and problem solving?
So I have 3 words for you: spaghetti, waffle, action.
Okay,
Okay.
you got to give me more on that. I love it.
Give you more on that. You mentioned a point right before this that explains what I call spaghetti thinking very well. And when our problems are very emotionally charged,
Yeah.
such as what are we doing with my mother for Christmas and your mother for Christmas,
Uh,
or those very personal, or you're trying to negotiate with a teenager to get them to get a job, go to college. I mean, these are very emotionally charged situations. And when we stack our emotions on top of the practical problems, on top of the legal problems, on top of the financial problems, on top of this, it ends up looking like spaghetti. And we see maybe 100 problems all interwoven together as one problem.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I like that.
And if I may, is there a particular problem that your listeners might identify with? And I'll give a little example of spaghetti thinking.
Okay. Well, this is way out in left field, but the first thing that came to mind for me, and I don't know if our listeners are experiencing it, but because you've mentioned mother a couple of times now, and like my mother, we've recently had to put in long-term care. She's suffering from dementia, and it does feel like, just there's such a weight and it's so emotionally laden, right? That there are moments when it definitely, you don't show up as the best version of yourself. So run with that one.
That is one of I have in my new book, I have an appendix of 20 personal and professional problems that were common problems that people were worried about. And that is actually one of them.
Oh,
So
I am not alone.
yeah, but it's okay. So my mom I need to figure out where she's going to go. And, there's this nursing home is over here, but maybe if I hire an in-home person, but then my husband's going to be mad at me because then I brought, my mother at home and I'm already so stressed out at work. And then, how am I going to manage all this? And my child's coming back from college possibly, and the housing market has just expanded in my area in such ways. Okay. If you see that type of thinking,
Yeah.
since I kind of queued you up for it, you
Yeah.
probably heard several different problems in there.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah. And they're layering on each other, of course, right? Some of them are business about the economic situation in the market versus the relationship with your intimate partner versus how that's going to impact on your kids. And then you layer on that with dementia, she's getting mean sometimes. And how do you negotiate that? So definitely seeing multiple layers of problems there.
But if you think back in a conversation you recently had with a friend or a business professional, it probably sounded like that. I mean, it could be, this contract ran out and I know I should have paid attention to this, but so and so from the other department they should have taken care of this. And it wasn't my job, but I'm always having to take care of their job. And don't they know my kid just turned 16? I'm trying to be family time with their birthdays. And then I need that bonus because I got to get my 16-year-old a car. They're going to be mad at me. Right. So that's a different context, right? But that's how people talk.
Yeah. Yeah. And definitely how we think. I mean, that's how we talk, and how we think is that exponentially magnified.
Absolutely. And, as leaders, that's how our employees think.
Yeah.
That's how people we're in business with are thinking. I've used this process. There was a lady who trained in this process with me, and she works for huge nonprofits. She speaks for Congress and, these very high level, very high functioning, successful individuals. And she's like calling me like, Sarah, this person was so mad about this foundation and this foundation. And so, I mean, this is a universal problem.
Yeah.
I believe, this type of spaghetti thinking. And since we haven't been trained in it, I cued you a bit. So you were kind of able to say, oh, yeah, there was a business problem and but what I love about that is it is very simple to see as soon as you know to see it.
Absolutely. It's that awareness factor that's so often missing and is a game changer when you start elevating your awareness about this stuff. Totally agree. Love it. Yeah.
So when you start being able to put labels on some of those noodles, okay, so let's talk about the financial aspect of your mother going into
Yeah.
care. That goes into one waffle square.
Okay. Here comes the waffles.
Here's the waffles. Yeah, this spaghetti. When you think about waffles, when you think about spaghetti, you take a bite, there's all these noodles, it's messy, it's yummy, but it's messy. And we're more conscientious of that plate not falling in our lap.
Yeah. And it's overwhelming, right? I mean, it's too much to take in. I love this I see where you're going here. So cute. I like the waffle boxes.
And within, a waffle bite, you can take one bite at a time. And when we start looking at these things as handling our problems one bite at a time,
Yeah.
and if I may, solving them simultaneously.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
The guilt of your mother
Yeah.
being in a,
Yes.
maybe you had issues from your childhood, or maybe you didn't, or she's the most wonderful thing that ever happened to you, or whatever it is. There's emotions surrounding that type of problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And let me
And
just put a pause in that for our listeners, put a pin in that for our listeners for a moment, because so many of the problems that we face in life get compounded exactly what you just said, Sarah, because there are triggers from our past, right? Whether with that person or sometimes completely unrelated, but it brings up all of this emotional baggage that then layers onto that pasta plate, that plate of spaghetti. So just wanted to put a pin in that. So sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm glad you did, because then many people's therapy process is kind of offloading all those emotions, but it's not really unraveling the spaghetti.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And not in an insult to therapist. I think we think that's a therapist's job, but a therapist might not necessarily say that was their job. Right? No, we're here to help you process. We're here to help you be brave enough to dig into that spaghetti, right? But we have expectations. They have expectations, and our expectations are not always aligning. And this is why I think this process should be taught in schools, and why it is in such an important process for leaders, whether professional or personal, to be able to help unravel that spaghetti for people.
Yeah. Well, and imagine a world where people actually had where we learn from a really young age to handle those challenges in ways that were more productive, more collaborative, more creative outcome based, as opposed to it ends up becoming a competitive model because everything feels so urgent and it's like win-lose, and the stakes seem so high. And then we miss these incredible opportunities for better solutions that are lying right there on the table if we could unravel the spaghetti. So.
which gets us into the action space, right? Yeah. So then you can really create action plans around each problem. And this is really kind of where this keys in. And if I may tell a story about my childhood, my mother is a lovely memory maker, but she brought home this dog and it was so fluffy and so cute. It bit everyone. It bit my neighbors, it bit my sister, it bit itself. Like it had a tail that curled up and it would go round
Yes.
and round.
We had a dog that did that.
Well, I asked my mom about that as an adult because in today's age we would have been sued. I mean, it really did bite children. It was it was not. And I said, Mom, why did you get that type of dog? And she said, we didn't have the internet to Google good family pets. It didn't exist. Right?
Good. Yeah.
And so even if we had been taught to problem solve, you and I did not grow up with the internet. So even if we had been taught to problem solve and make decisions, we do live in the information age. It does look different now.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true.
And so when you can get it into the little waffle squares, then those almost become like searches. Like, okay, how to financially prepare for my mother's financial needs, right? That's a very clear, like, okay, here's something I can do about this immediately. There's clarity and there's so much information at our fingertips when we're taking one bite at a time.
Yeah.
Rather than having them all swim together.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm loving that. And it's interesting just when you mentioned about the information age, like there are pros and cons to that, right? I mean, on the one hand, we've got access to all of this information, but not all of it is reliable. And there can be such a sense of overwhelm. And we're seeing this increasing polarization because people are only getting fed information that already supports the views they already have, which increases the polarization. And I just, when you said about the childhood story with the dog that bites and chasing its tail, oh my gosh, I'm sorry to take you off track here, but just had such a visual. We had our first pet ever, family pet, was a German Shepherd, and he was neurotic. We got him at a year old and he would go in circles and bite his tail as well. And I remember one of the first time we'd left the kids home, we'd gone out and we came home and it was a combination of, it was springtime. So of course we had the mosquitoes and black flies coming out, and I walked in and opened the door and there was just blood up the hallway walls. And I was like my heart was just pounding out of my chest, but it turned out it was a combination of the kids killing the mosquitoes with blood all over the walls there and the dog chasing its tail. And then it was running and the tail started bleeding. It was just an absolute, you talk about problem solving. That was a big negotiation with myself to get myself calmed down there. So anyhow, I digress. I apologize. So we've got
spaghetti problem. Yeah. I mean, the walls first? Do I come for the kids first? Do I, depends on what color your walls.
Visions of axe murderers in the house. It was outrageous. So, all right. So we got spaghetti, we got waffles, and what's the next step?
Action.
Oh,
because yes, once you're in those different waffle squares, and when we were talking about them being aligned, let's take this problem you just had. There's a practical problem of, whoa, we have white walls. We need to get the blood off. There's an issue. And then there's emotional problem of, are we safe in our home? Yeah. And then there's a maybe parental guilt emotional problem of, did I really buy a dog that bites everyone, bites itself? Then there's, oh my gosh, my kid's okay. Okay. Yeah. So if you're trying to create an action plan and you see this problem as, oh my gosh, are my kids okay? Is there an axe murderer in the house? Yeah. And how do I get blood off my walls? Yeah. Right. Those aren't the same problems. No. But we're presenting them to one another as the same problem. I had this problem last night. And then you say all the spaghetti, right? And so really, and within therapy and stuff, so many people are getting, and emotional intelligence, which I love emotional intelligence, but I want it to be our tailwind, not flying into the headwind of feeding these emotional elephants. And they get bigger and bigger, and then we get fear and anxiety. We can't push back our limitations and we get so stuck. So it's not that I am a robot who ignores my emotions. I just want people to be aware when you look at a waffle square, they're lined side by side. And when you think about, okay, I'm going to solve the emotional problem of making sure my kids are okay and solve the practical problem of making, getting blood off the walls, right? Yeah. Or solving the practical problem of how am I going to pay for long-term care and solving the emotional problem of, oh my gosh, my mother's going to die and we have unresolved issues. Like I see a lot of people get stuck because they do one or the other. Some people stick the practical problem, ignore the emotional problem, and others let the emotional problem grow so big that they never get around to solving the practical problems, which creates more problems.
And I'm loving this approach because I mean, as you're talking, I assume part of the benefit of the waffle approach is that you separate them out so that you can see them with more clarity. They're not all mushed up, but it also allows you then to prioritize. It's like, okay, I don't have this giant plate of spaghetti that I'm having to deal with and don't know where to start. I see each of the individual issues for what they are. I can get a little more clarity about it, a little more detachment about it. I can be more intentional about the emotion that I bring to the table. And then it makes it easier to get into action because I can prioritize. Is that the idea behind it?
You did such a good job. You're going through the chapters in my book just so well right now. And a couple of things on that. Yes, for sure. And we've talked about spaghetti waffle action. You can also think about it as like a word search
Mm,
versus a to-do list.
yeah.
Okay. So the spaghetti is obviously the word search. You're like,
So
oh, what
good.
should I do? Where should I go? What should I do? And a to-do list, it was actually funny when my editor sent me back my book the first time, she automatically took the paragraph that I was saying of like, and then, my mom this and my husband this and this, and she automatically, put it in a to-do list because she said, well, this will be easier for your readers to read. And I said, I'm sure it would be. But that is not how their children are talking to them. That is not how their employees are talking to them, right?
So
And so it
good.
was this whole conversation with her and I about like, how do I get my point across without being so confusing? So if you're
Good.
picking up on this, I think I'm doing pretty well. Think about it as word search to do list. And in the problem solved method, it's interesting. Some people are comfortable with problem solving and some people are more comfortable with the word decisions.
Yeah.
Okay. Making a decision. They don't want to see it as a problem. They want to see it
Yeah.
as a decision to be made. I don't care. I think they're quite interchangeable, but you do you, whatever you want. But in the prioritizing and decision making, you're exactly right. Once you get that clarity, then you can prioritize. And my highest advice to your listeners is, really just trying to get the first three
Yeah.
priorities. When we get really stuck in rock and hard places and overthinking and analysis paralysis, when we think, okay, I can come up with 20 things and there's going to be a decision that's going to meet all 20 goals for me. It's just,
Yeah. Yeah. Loving this process. So why don't we talk about some of the benefit? I mean, some are obvious, but just for our listeners there, because I think a lot of people don't think very intentionally about their decision-making processes or their problem-solving skills or lack thereof. So what are some of the benefits of being an effective decision maker or problem solver? Like, how does it impact our lives?
So you talked about the 35,000 decisions a day. Okay. So that estimate is coming from a Cornell University survey. They were figuring out how many decisions people made about food each day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm,
People guessed they made 16, 18 decisions about food each day. They made 219.
that's incredible.
That's just food,
Yeah.
right? That's not running a business, going into the courtroom, whatever it is, right? Like that's just food. Okay. So that's where that 35,000 number comes from. It's kind of an estimate based on that information. So you're making, I think I added up, it was like 34 decisions a minute.
Wow. Yeah.
So you can think about all kinds of benefits from that, and making that process simpler. But definitely burnout, avoiding burnout, being respected as a leader. When you get into solution-based thinking and you're able to take this spaghetti mess and say, okay, I think the problem we're really trying to solve here is this. And I feel like there's several problems we're talking about all at one. Click, click, click. Does that sound right to you? And being respectful, that's very different than I know what we should do here. Everyone should listen to me,
Yeah.
which is not usually taken that well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's when you give people's thoughts back to them or are able, it's really like a very advanced active listening, right? And so when you can kind of give it back to them and say, okay, it feels like you really just kind of mentioned 5 problems. Would it be okay if I named them back to you? Yeah. Click, click, click. Whoa, you're so smart. Oh my gosh, you're so amazing. Right. And it's very simple.
Yeah.
It's just not taught, and that's where in my work you can kind of see where it was like they came to me over a major life circumstance, like a divorce
Sure.
or something like that. And then they were leaving with a promotion
Yeah.
over and over and
Yeah.
over. their
So,
friends and family were like, "What happened to you? You seem so much more calm."
yeah, yeah.
Right?
Well, it's
When you're
funny,
not
if you're
speaking.
wondering why I'm laughing, I'm not laughing at, I love this. And as soon as you said about that advanced active listening, I mean, one of the foundations that I teach all the time, I call it elevated active listening. And I think
Mm.
you've described it so beautifully. It's that not only, we don't listen well, I find in North America, we're terrible listeners notoriously, but when you can reflect back what somebody is saying and do it in a way that's so gracious that you're actually presenting their position much more articulately even than they did, that is such a powerful tool. It triggers reciprocity. They're more likely to be open to listening with truly open ears to your position as well. It helps calm the temperature in the room. I think it's so, so beautiful. So I love how aligned a lot of our theories are, and so powerful, such a life lesson. And I'd love you to speak to the confidence piece as well, because I would think that taking that kind of model just allows you to show up with so much more confidence, which then allows you to get out of your comfort zone more, which would breed more competence, which increases your confidence even more. I'd love if you could speak to that.
So there's a book called 13 Things Mentally Strong Women Don't Do by Amy Morin. I like this book. I love her original book, but I like Amy Morin, 2 thumbs up, all good things. And there was a little tiny line from this big book, and it said that men tend to solve their problems and women tend to solve their emotions.
Mm,
And I wanted to throw up,
yeah.
right? And go back to all the conversations I'd had with my female friends, right? And they're just like, we kind of get into this emotion, solving our emotions. And we can't solve our emotions, right? So when you think about something like public speaking, which is one of the number one fears, and people say, "Oh, I'm just so nervous. I'm going to be a public speaker. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I mess up? And what about this?" Right? So trying to solve that emotion, you're never going to find the perfect therapist or the perfect situation where you're not scared to be a public speaker.
Yeah.
The best solution is to publicly speak several times and not die from it.
Yeah.
That's the best solution. It's the practical solution, the practical problem to solve that actually solves the emotional problem.
Yeah. So good. So good. Yeah.
And
And
that's
when
where
you're
that
talking about the difference between men and women as well, I know you talk about smart girl syndrome. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yes. And it can be translated to smart guy syndrome, but it doesn't sound as cool. So I see so many amazing women. Okay. And they, were struggling in piano lessons and then worked harder and got better. Or they were struggling in math and worked harder and got better. Or were struggling in building a business and they worked harder and got better. Okay. And so they think, oh, the solution is I work harder and then there's an outcome that I'm happy with, which works most of the time
Mm.
until it doesn't.
Yep. Exactly.
We apply that same strategy to wishing our mother-in-law acted differently,
Yeah.
or we apply that same strategy to nagging our husband about the laundry,
Yeah.
or we apply that same strategy to hoping someone else will change, or hoping certain circumstances change that we don't really have control of. And in every book I ever write, there will be a line that says, if it's not working, stop doing it.
Yeah.
And that is my life method. And it's just, we don't think about it, right? We just kind of get up and go on. And then, I'll say like, oh, there was somebody recently and they were talking about struggling with confidence. And I said, well, how long have you been in therapy? They said 2 years. I'm not anti-therapy. I'm not. I just want to go very clear. I'm just using this example.
Yeah.
And, she said, oh, I said, what have you been working on in therapy? She said, well, my addiction issues, my love addiction issues, my trauma childhood. I said, wow, I can't imagine why you're struggling with your confidence talking about such lovely, and she kind of laughed. But I said, but really?
Yeah.
I said, how long have you been in therapy? For 2 years. You've been talking about what's wrong with you for 2 years. No wonder you're struggling with your confidence. Like, if it's not working, try something else.
Yeah.
And I asked her, I said, well, how much longer, if I had a reading tutor for my daughter and 2 years later, she
Yeah.
couldn't read.
Yeah.
And I asked 100 people if I should get a new tutor or not.
That is so good. And it's funny, such a simple proposition. And I find most great ideas are actually just simple obvious, profound insights, and we miss them probably because they're so simple, right? And you speak a bit there to it, that's like a mindset shift, right? That, hey, if it's not working, stop doing it. So, and I often say our first and most important negotiation is with ourselves, negotiating our own mindset. So I'd love, what tips do you have for our listeners on how to negotiate their mindset to help them become better problem solvers, or at least kickstart that process?
Oh, yes. Okay. So, oh, you added the problem solvers thing. I'm just going to say something that I've talked about that a lot, but I love, there's this whole concept of self-esteem.
Yeah.
And I think we've really lost out on self-integrity
Yeah. No.
in the confidence process, right? And it's like someone sent me their personality type recently. A client, I was trying to help build her confidence. I said, print off a personality test, highlight some of the things that they say about you as you start to build your confidence. And she says, I'm an ENFP. We don't have any follow through. And I said, I'm an EFP and I'm finishing my second book in a year and a half. I've got a globally acclaimed podcast.
Yeah.
I've got a huge business. I keep hiring people. Like, how
Yeah.
can we lead ourselves, influence ourselves, negotiate with ourselves in that process? And I think so many times in the confidence conversation, we're going to affirmations like, you look beautiful today, body positive, some of these things. And we're missing out on that self-integrity piece of like, I follow through.
Yeah.
When I say I'm going to do something, I show up. I show up for myself, not just for other people.
Yeah.
If I say I'm going to do something, I show up for myself, which probably does go back to the problem solving question, because when you spaghetti waffle action, it doesn't matter what you do if you don't implement any of the action pieces,
Yeah. And
right?
so important because it's retraining our brain, right? I mean, if we break our promises to ourselves or tell stories to ourselves that are not empowering, then we can't step into the best version of ourselves. So I think it's so important to retrain our brains on that as well, so that if we say we're going to write a book, we finish the darn book, because otherwise the next time it's like, oh, that's just Cindy saying she's going to do whatever. We don't have to worry about it, as opposed to, oh, Cindy said she's writing a book. We better find solutions to make sure that happens, right? And go looking for those solutions. So powerful. And again, you talk about the differences between sort of men and women a bit, or we've touched on it. I know as women, we tend to want to take on all the problems of the world, right? Or at least all the problems of the people we care about. I'd love your insights on that. What do you say about that?
May I tell you my boundaries
I
story?
would love to hear your boundary story.
Everyone's favorite, because you didn't ask about boundaries, but you kind of did, right? And in that conversation, because that's such a popular conversation right now, and we need self boundaries, like internal boundaries, like, oh, I'm not gonna drunk text my high school boyfriend or whatever it might be, it can be silly, or I'm going to ask for that promotion, I'm going to move more money into my retirement account, right? Those can be self boundaries. But in the conversation around, my past work has been in toxic person proof stuff. So in our boundaries with other people and those big problems in our lives, we go back to the story of the three little pigs. Okay.
Yeah.
And one little pig had straw boundaries. One little pig had stick
Oh, so good.
boundaries. And one little pig had brick boundaries. But none of the pigs changed the big bad wolf.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in our conversations around boundaries, sometimes we forget that they're meant to protect pigs,
Yeah.
not to set wolves straight.
Yeah. That is
I
so
think we kind of get this idea in our head of like, oh, I'm going to show that big bad wolf how strong I am. And then he's going to say, well, I've been selfish for years. And now you've got me. Oh, you tricked me, you stupid little pig. Now we can be on even ground to be friends. No, that is not what is going to happen. And so I know you originally didn't ask me about boundaries, but
I love that. Are you kidding? That was worth the diversion there. That was so good. Now, is that your story, or did you grab that from somebody else? I love that. Love that. What a great analogy.
it goes back to my strategy thing. I hate seeing people do things that aren't going to work. I hate it. I hate the wasting time. I hate the added expense. I hate the anxiety. I hate that. And so when people are like, okay, because I'll ask people, what's your, healing strategy? What's your life strategy? What's your business strategy? And they'll say, oh, I'm going to have boundaries.
Yeah.
And then they're not going to do this to me again. And I'm like, oh no,
Yeah.
how's it working for you? Well, they just got bad. And I was like, well, they're probably better fighters than you. I mean, big bad wolves are better fighters than pigs. So as much as you're not going to get 20 years of fighting practice into the little pig, no matter how strong their boundaries are, how much therapy they do, or whatever limits they set. And so I just think it's, again, if it's not working, stop doing it.
But it's
All
such a
this,
great analogy on so many levels, right? I love that because A, it's about you changing yourself. You can only control ourselves. We can't control other people. It's just a perfect analogy for setting those boundaries because you hear so much talk about it now. That is definitely a unique perspective. I love that mindset shift. Now, you had mentioned in that about the toxic person proofing, that's been your work. And I know you host the podcast, Toxic Person Proof. So tell us a little bit about that, your show, what inspired it? What is the idea behind this toxic person proofing?
I am obsessed with toxic person proofing, which I think is problem solving, right? Have you heard the term gaslighting? That's a
Yes.
very big buzzword right now. Okay, so gaslighting in many ways, so many of the conversations around toxic people are just these really abstract concepts and confusing words, narcissism. It's just love bombing,
Yeah.
trauma bond. I mean, it's very confusing. And so one of my biggest passions is to discover teaching points that are very easy. So these very hard to implement ideas and make them as simple as possible. And that's where the toxic person proof stuff comes in, and stories like the boundaries and the little pigs, and even with gaslighting, they're really getting you off topic.
Yeah.
But let's say you're already living in spaghetti thinking, okay?
Yeah.
You're already confused. You're already all over the place. And then someone gaslights you. That's not my fault. That's your fault. But you're
Yeah.
already swimming in spaghetti.
Yeah.
Okay. And so for the last 5 years, that's been one of the very first things we talked about is with my ladies. It's just like, okay, spaghetti, waffle. Let's do that. That is one of the best ways to protect yourself from either manipulation or confusion or gaslighting, or it's just like, oh, that I don't think that's right. I don't think something's right. And the more clarity you have in your own mind, the less likely someone's going to be to confuse you.
Oh, so important, right? And because one of the things I always advocate in negotiating our best life, if you will, is to negotiate your environment as well. And that includes managing your inner circle, right? Those people that you surround yourself with, who you let into your life. So, how can we keep ourselves toxic person proof? What are some tips you have on that?
There is a delay, not deny
Hmm.
aspect that I love. So I know a lot of people in the conversation on toxic people are just like, no contact, they're terrible, stay away from them. If only we could, right? And historically, experts that I've talked to in my podcast and stuff, 1 in 10 people had some type of personality disorder, or they were
Yeah.
on some type of the antisocial scale. Everyone is in agreement that we're getting closer to 1 in 5.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is
There's a
scary.
lot of conversation around kids being isolated, helicopter parenting,
Yeah.
lots of theories on why that's happening. And with toxic people, there are no agreed theories on why things are happening, but there's a lot of agreement on this is happening. No, they aren't going to change. And I see so many people with that smart girl syndrome or smart guy syndrome. Well, if I just work a little harder, my boss will like me. If
Yeah.
I a little more forgiving,
Yeah.
my cousin be mean to me anymore, whatever it is, and just doing all the work where it's never your turn.
Yeah.
And the toxic person's wants, needs, desires, moods, money, whatever it is, are always more important than yours.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. And it's interesting when you say that as well, that everybody's like, oh, well, just stay away from them. But I mean, often these are people who are in our closest circle already. They're a family, right? These are people who are in our tightest possible inner circle, and it's finding that way. So explain a little bit when you say about that delay, don't deny. Just put a pin in that for us.
Yes. So I had a neighbor who was intermittent fasting. And I said, are you not eating lunch? And she said, no, I'm eating all my food in like 3 hour window, which was like very serious. But anyway, she
Yeah.
said, it's delay, not deny. And I was like, ooh, I can use that. And so with toxic people, sometimes they are just so egregious, we need to just deny access to us.
Yeah.
Right. That is very, very true. And no guilt, no shame. You are not here on this world to help everyone else become more selfish. You can do it, right? Deny. But many people, it's delay. And so thinking about putting just more distance between you, for example, send an email to that toxic coworker rather than visiting them. If you have to visit them, catch them in a crowd. If you're back in the office, catch
Yeah.
them in a crowd. Don't sit beside them in a meeting. Try to get other people around so they don't have unlimited access to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Now, I know you've spoken at events like the Emotional Abuse Summit and Healing Narcissistic Trauma conferences, things like that. And I'm glad you really touched on this, because I'd love if you can sort of connect the dots a little bit for us as well in terms of what role, and you've touched on some of it already, Sarah, so beautifully. And what role does problem solving play in dealing with serious issues like that? Like, how does your spaghetti waffle action maybe come into play to help in these kind of situations?
Yeah, so there's spaghetti waffle action. I talked a bit about, the less confused you are, the less likely you are going to be able to be manipulated. But I must mention in what you said to this question, my around the house method. Okay. So around the house problem solving, it is the best problem solving when you have a very difficult person. Okay. And so let's imagine, Cindy, that you are going to a party in the backyard. And you said you were from North America too. So
Yeah.
when we go to visit people, we knock on the front door, right? That's like you just
Yeah.
go in. That's just normal. I've talked to people from Austria and everyone else about this
Yeah.
concept, And so it's expected. We go and knock on the front door. But let's imagine the most difficult person you know is behind that door and gets to decide if they open it, they can open it and let you in.
Yeah.
Okay. So then knock, knock, who's there? It's Cindy. Can you let me in? No, Cindy, you're not invited to this party. No one wants you here. You're so stupid. Why don't you check that invitation? I bet no one really invited you. You've got the wrong house. Why would anyone want you at the party? No one likes you.
Yeah.
Or they're just dead silence. Or they're yelling at you. I mean, whatever the reason, what's happening behind the door. And if I walked to the front porch and I said, "Hey, Cindy, what problem are you trying to solve? What are you trying to do right now?" You'd probably say, "Oh, I'm trying to get this person to open the front door."
Yeah.
Right? But if I'd asked you in your car before you got to the front door, you'd said, "I'm going to the party in the backyard."
Hmm.
Okay. And toxic people are so fabulous at becoming our focus.
Yeah.
And we think the problem we're trying to solve is getting them to open the front door, getting them to pay that bill, getting them to take responsibility for that project, getting them to whatever, right? But if we remember, okay, the problem I'm really trying to solve is getting to the backyard. You can walk around the house.
Yes,
You can
exactly.
have a helicopter drop you in. You can get a trampoline and jump over the fence. You can hire a group of cheerleaders and have a pyramid and they basket toss. You can hang up in lava and they can people. I mean, there's a million creative solutions if we are very clear about the problem we're trying to solve.
Hmm.
And so that's why I call the around the house,
I
because
love it. I love it. So good.
yeah, you see somebody in the airline, and their ticket didn't work. And, or something happened and
Yeah.
what problem are you trying to solve? I'm trying to get this airline attendant to do their job.
Yeah.
No, the problem you're trying to solve is getting to Texas or
Yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah. Exactly. I love that. And as you were talking about that, Sarah, it was interesting to me because that, like, the bully behind the door, that's often ourself, right? I mean, what you were describing applies to our self-talk, because we often talk to ourselves in ways that we would never dream of talking to other people like. So I love that we can use that approach ourselves, find other ways to get around that sort of inner critic as well. And it's funny, as you're saying about the front door, I immediately thought of did you see that movie Michael Moore did about the Canadian, because I'm a Canadian, so the difference about and he would actually go and see if the front doors were unlocked in Canada, and most of them were.
No, I haven't seen
Oh,
it.
it's very funny, very
Well,
interesting.
maybe you were talking about that inner critic, and I gave my inner critic a different job,
Yeah.
which we've already talked about in this podcast, which is, if it's not working, stop doing it. And that is the only that's the only job my inner critic now has.
Yeah.
Right? Because at that point, I probably need to be really, Sarah, you have thought this person was going to do the right thing 15 times.
Yeah.
And they can't do the right thing. I see my inner critic for that, because I kind of need that energy behind it. So I get off my track. But maybe that'll work for some of your listeners too, because I think taking away that inner critic completely can feel really scary, like we'll be out of line or something will happen. So if you kind of think about giving it a different job,
Yeah.
that works for you. If you heard me, I wasn't shaming myself. I was using that inner critic to lead myself and to help myself with those negotiations, not to shame myself.
I like that transitional sort of shift about it. Cause I mean, I often talk about taking that inner critic and, thank her, recognize that she's been trying to keep you safe and then release her. But I like that idea about giving her a job, a role, a more productive role to be able to play. I think that's great. And I just wanted to circle back. You had talked earlier about emotion as well, and that the different when we show up with that emotion at the front end, as opposed to being able to get a little clarity about it. I'd love if you could dig just a little bit deeper on the role emotion plays in sort of negotiating our problem solving skills. I often say there's a difference between bringing emotion, like bringing the emotion of your deep why to the table, for example, which is more intentional use of it rather than being emotional in a negotiation. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
So when I was about 9 or 10 years old, I walked by this TV in my parents' bedroom, and they had America's Funniest Home Videos on. Right? If you've seen that show in
Oh,
Canada,
yeah.
it's very,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely growing up. And there was this zookeeper, and he was on the ground shoveling elephant poop, and this elephant sat on his head. And it was like so traumatic. And I was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I remember as a kid thinking that would have to be the worst way to die. And you can Google it. If you Google elephant on zookeeper's head, it's still available. Exact same video. And so I was just horrified as a kid. I remember thinking, oh, that has to be the worst way to die ever. But I think so many people's emotions are like that. They stick these huge emotions in front of themselves. We don't want to be behind the elephant.
Yeah.
It smells. We get smacked by the tail. There's poop. Like there's nothing good happening behind the elephant. And when you were talking about the why, that's using your emotions as tailwind, right? Rather than headwind. I'm afraid is flying into headwind, or, just having those like huge emotional elephants. And I just see people feeding the emotional elephants and starving the practical solutions.
Mm.
Right.
Nice.
And even like, well, I'm working on my limiting beliefs. Well, just sign up for Toastmasters.
Yeah.
Well, that's scary. I'm in my comfort zone. No, that's not a comfort zone. Your comfort zone's being like successful where it's comfortable. You're in an uncomfortable zone. Stop telling yourself it's a comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
And so just really kind of going back to where we were talking about solving the emotional and practical problems side by side.
Yeah.
Rather than in front. And I just see so many people sticking those huge emotional elephants right in front of them, getting smacked by the tail, using all their energy, talking to their friends about their fears, or talking to their coaches about their fears, and they're just feed that emotional elephant, and it gets fatter and then poops more.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
terrible strategy.
Yeah, where your focus goes, your energy flows, right? It's the law of attraction. The more we keep focusing on it, the more we're drawing it to us. And you just have the best metaphors there. I got to say, like your metaphors they're so graphic images that they'll stick with people, and it'll make it easy for them to be able to remember them when they need it and to be able to apply it in life. I just love it. I could talk to you for hours. I am mindful that I know you got some other stuff going on here. So I normally like to end with what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had? Again, doesn't have to be on your topic of expertise. It can just be one of those aha moments where you looked at things differently.
Okay, so it is not selfish. I was just such a people pleaser growing up. I mean, I was a pastor's daughter, nurse's daughter. I mean, like everybody is like, oh, you just help everyone. I went my senior trip. This is like almost embarrassing to say now. It seems nice, but really it's just kind of like, what was I? But my senior year, instead of going like to the beach with my friends, I went to an orphanage in Jamaica and was like helping the orphans, which it sounds really nice, but really I just kind of want to vomit on my like that self and just be like, man, were you really that responsible for saving the world? Because I'm pretty sure the world is just fine. It was a lot of what I call a helpaholic, right? I just thought I should help everyone. And so a real shift for me became when me being so unselfish was not the cure for someone else to become unselfish. Like quite often, me being so unselfish allowed them to practice selfishness.
Oh.
And the more light I was trying to spread, the more light they got to avoid and the more darkness they could sit into. And it goes back into the toxic person thing where it's like, okay, their rules, wants, needs, desires are always more important than mine.
Yeah.
And I was telling myself, oh, I'm just being a good person. I'm being
Yes.
kind. I'm being forgiving. No, I was helping support their selfishness.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I am so in alignment with that. I mean, countless examples. We convince ourselves that we're doing great work, right? We're being magnanimous, but we actually deprive. And I use this often with women because I think we're so conditioned to be the nurturers, the caregivers, that we don't want to give up that identity. So I try and shift their mindset around that by saying that you're actually depriving other people of being the best version of themselves. When you're enabling them and engaging in that kind of codependent behavior, you actually make them uglier versions of themselves. You're depriving them of the opportunity. So I think that's just so beautiful. I love that. And I was laughing as you were saying about going to Jamaica. Mine on a much less profound note, very similar background. Growing up, our parents would give us money. We didn't have a lot. I grew up in a low rental apartment in Scarborough. We had a local movie theater. You'd get your money to go to the show, buy yourself popcorn and treats or whatever. So my sister always would be, she'd buy it and she'd take more if she could get it. And I would take my treat money and go buy a loaf of bread to bring home. And again, I wouldn't have shared it because it's embarrassing. It is like, I'm like, what was wrong with me? And I like reframing the word self-centered because I think it's about being so centered in yourself and recognizing that you are entitled to spoil yourself. You're entitled to feel proud. You're entitled to brag on yourselves and recognize your accomplishments. So such a beautiful mindset shift you shared. Thank you so much. And Sarah, thank you. This has just been an absolute pleasure. Like just so many incredible gold nuggets that are any one of them are game changing. So thanks so much for sharing your insights here with us today.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're going to have to get you back for a part 2 for sure. And for our listeners out there, if you want to learn more about Sarah, we'll make sure to put all of her social media contacts in our show notes as well. You can check her out on Facebook at Bounce Back Coaching. Anywhere else you'd like to direct them to right now, Sarah, that would be the best bet for them to check out?
My problem solving book won't be out till September, but definitely check out Becoming Toxic Person Proof if you have any difficult people in your life. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
And it was very much, I joke that if Bossy Pants and the Sociopath Next Door had a baby, it would be that book. Because I do try to make it as entertaining as possible and have those aha moments right away. And then they are welcome to check out my Toxic Person Proof podcast as well.
Definitely.
And the Problem Solved podcast. I'm doing this whole transition piece right now, but I'm determined to ride 2 horses with 1 butt.
Yeah.
I'm not getting rid of my toxic person proof stuff.
Yes.
But I'm excited because to me it's the same thing. My coaching clients and stuff are like, no, you're not doing anything new. Why are you telling people you're doing something new? I'm like, it seems like I'm doing something new.
Well, I actually had a beautiful vision of you. We saw that, what was that show called? Chevalier or whatever? It was like one of the Cirque du Soleil, but it was all on horses. And they had these gorgeous images, these women who could come out with a foot on, they'd have 2 horses, 1 foot on one and 1 on the other. So I think that's what you do. I could see you as this just gorgeous goddess sort of floating through there with 1 leg on either horse, both of them important and the more powerful together. So hats off to you.
Thank you. I was kind of envisioning myself doing the splits. And I thought,
yeah. You're like stepping on the dock in the boat, and all of a sudden you're like you're past the point of no return when you know you're just in trouble.
Very flexible. I do a lot of yoga. It should be fine. This split should be no problem.
Well, for our listeners out there, I'm sure you just got loads of value from this episode. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, and make sure to share this with anyone that you think would get value. And there have been so many incredible life-changing nuggets here. Definitely share this episode. Make sure to give it a 5-star rating. And as I say, share it with the people in your life you care about. So, and thanks so much for joining us today. Definitely glad that you were here. And before we sign off, though, also just want to share some ways that we can work together if you're looking to up-level your negotiation skills. I've got everything from online to group to my signature one-on-one mastermind or VIP experiences available. Help you better leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve in life. And if that's something interesting to you, then check out our website at artoffemininenegotiation.com or womenonpurpose.ca. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can start missing out and getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.